The images filtering out of Rotherham are not the story. The broken windows, the plumes of black smoke, the endless, screaming sirens, that is merely the symptom. The disease is festering in the corridors of Westminster. What you witnessed was not a riot. It was a reckoning. The final, desperate scream of a town, of a people, pushed beyond the limits of patience, beyond the limits of endurance. For years, the political class has conducted a controlled demolition of this country, and last night, the foundations finally gave way. The shattered glass glittering like frost on the pavements of Wellgate is a mirror, reflecting the broken promises of 3 decades. The smell of burning plastic is the stench of a decaying social contract. The wail of the sirens is the soundtrack to a nation's nervous breakdown. Every brick thrown is a vote of no confidence. The mainstream media, in their predictable, cowardly fashion, will call them thugs. They'll zoom in on one angry face, edit out the hundreds standing in grim silence behind him. They'll call it a far-right protest before the first police report is even filed. They are lying. They are lying because the truth is too terrifying for them to admit, that the trust holding this nation together has been systematically, deliberately, and unforgivably pulverized. That the delicate threads of consent that bind the governed to their government have been severed, one, by the arrogance and indifference of an untouchable elite. The question is no longer if this country is at a breaking point. The real question is, what happens when millions of people realize, all at once, that their government is no longer on their side? It began, as it always does, with a lie. A cascade of lies, tumbling down from the heights of power. The lie that you can have infinite, uncontrolled, legal immigration without consequences. The lie that your concerns are invalid, your patriotism is bigotry, your voice is irrelevant. They told you this while they turned your hotels into free housing estates, without consultation, without consent, without a shred of common decency. From the seaside towns of Southport to the industrial heartlands of Rotherham, they commandeered over 400 hotels. 400 monuments to their failure, and to their contempt for you. They filled them with thousands upon thousands of illegal arrivals. Overwhelmingly young men, who crossed the channel in dinghies, breaking the first and most fundamental law of any sovereign nation. And their punishment? There is none. Instead, they are rewarded. A warm bed. 3 meals a day. Security guards. Private healthcare. All funded by you. The British taxpayer. This isn't just pocket money. Critics have placed the figure at over £7 million. Every single day. That's your money. The lorry driver working 60 hours a week. The nurse on a double shift. The pensioner in a cold flat, terrified of her energy bill. £7 million a day. That's enough to fund an extra 20,000 police officers on our streets. It's enough to clear the NHS waiting list for hip replacements in a month. But your grandmother's pain doesn't win votes in Brussels. This is not a policy failure. Do not let them insult your intelligence by claiming incompetence. This is a deliberate, calculated policy of national humiliation. A message, sent from the gilded cage of the Westminster bubble to every corner of this kingdom: you do not matter. Your heritage does not matter. Your community does not matter. Your country is not yours. A compliant, atomized, rootless population is easier to control, easier to tax, and easier to ignore. Sources inside the Home Office have been sounding the alarm for over 2 years. One senior civil servant, a man with 20 years of service, reportedly drafted a memo warning of a catastrophic social cohesion failure in specific towns, including Rotherham. He warned that local services were being stretched to the point of collapse, that police were losing control, that public anger was reaching a boiling point. His report, insiders claim, was buried. The man was reassigned to a meaningless bureaucratic post. He was silenced. Another source, a council leader from a northern town, spoke of late-night phone calls from the Home Office. Not requests, but demands. We were told a coach was arriving in 6 hours. No discussion. No budget. Just a demand to cope. He described it as colonization by spreadsheet. Commentators have warned for a decade that allowing 95% of illegal immigrants to remain is not a deterrent, it is a giant, illuminated welcome sign, visible from across the globe. They were labeled extremists. They were deplatformed. This chaos was not an accident. It was the intended destination. The endgame of a globalist ideology, promoted in Davos and Marrakesh, that views borders as an inconvenience, national identity as a threat, and the British people as an obstacle to be managed, demoralized, and ultimately replaced. And so we have the great betrayal, a two-tier Britain. A nation split in two, not by wealth, but by worth in the eyes of the state. On one side, you have the British people, treated as a resource to be taxed and an inconvenience to be managed. A former Royal Marine from Doncaster, haunted by the things he has seen in defense of this flag, now watches the country he fought for being given away. He waits 18 months for mental health support while the state spends millions every single day housing those who have broken our laws. Think of the care worker in Skegness. Her 0 hours contract is cancelled for the winter because the hotel she worked at is now an asylum centre. She paid her taxes for 20 years. Now she is queuing at a food bank, in the shadow of a building where lawbreakers are given everything for free. This is not justice. This is a calculated insult. A young couple in Rotherham, saving for a decade to get a deposit on a house, watch as local hotels are block-booked by the government for years to come, inflating prices and hollowing out their community. Their dream of a family home is sacrificed on the altar of open borders. A shopkeeper on Wellgate, whose family has run the business for 3 generations, now sweeps glass from his doorway. His insurance premiums will skyrocket. His customers are afraid. His life's work is hanging by a thread, not because of market forces, but because of a political decision made by people who will never have to live with the consequences. Think of the pensioner in Essex, who served this country her whole life, now counting pennies, terrified of turning the heating on. She sees the news and understands the bitter truth. Her government has more compassion for a stranger who broke into the country than it does for her. This is the brutal reality of the two-tier system. And what is the response from the architects of this decay? They announce a new policing fund. £4.7 million. Sounds impressive until you read the small print. The money isn't new. It's being stripped from existing local budgets. From youth services. From community safety schemes. From the very things that hold a town together. Let the sheer, breathtaking cynicism of that sink in. They engineer the crisis. They ignore your warnings. They watch as the pressure builds to an explosion. And then, they punish you for it. They defund your children's future to pay for the police required to control your anger. It is a perfect, diabolical, closed loop of state-sponsored gaslighting. A masterclass in contempt. And at the very heart of this rotten system, the political class sits, protected by private security, ferried in blacked-out cars through the gated parliamentary estate, utterly, blissfully, criminally indifferent to the nation burning just beyond their windows. Then there is the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer. The great pretender. The man who promises a decade of national renewal. The former Director of Public Prosecutions, the country's top lawyer, now presiding over its descent into lawlessness. As Rotherham teetered on the brink, as police officers were being pelted with missiles, as families locked their doors in fear, where was this great leader? He wasn't in the Commons, facing the fury of the nation. He wasn't on a train to South Yorkshire, to listen to the people he claims to represent. No. Sir Keir Starmer was in a bunker. A hermetically sealed, media-managed room, somewhere deep in the bowels of Downing Street. Imagine that room. The low hum of servers. The smell of expensive air freshener failing to mask the panic. Young men and women in sharp suits, who have never held a real job outside the Westminster machine, frantically typing, trying to frame the narrative. They aren't solving a crisis. They are managing PR for a collapsing regime. They don't see a town in agony, they see a negative news event to be mitigated. When he finally emerged on camera, it was a performance of chilling detachment. The flag was perfectly placed. The suit was immaculate. The delivery was steady, clinical, soulless. He spoke of marauding gangs and unacceptable violence, using the condescending jargon of the North London dinner party circuit to condemn a working-class town his party has neglected for 40 years. It was the language of a man describing a problem on a spreadsheet, not a country in pain. There was no understanding in his eyes. No passion in his voice. Just the cold, reptilian calm of a careerist bureaucrat whose focus was not on Rotherham, but on the evening news cycle and his polling numbers. His words carried no pulse because the man has no connection to the blood and soil of this country. This is, after all, the man who as DPP presided over an era of institutional paralysis. The man who knelt for the politics of division. His instincts are not to serve the British people, but to appease the loudest, most aggressive activist networks. He is a hollow man, a vessel waiting to be filled by the most fashionable radical ideology of the day. And while he hid, reciting his focus group lines, another voice was being heard. The voice of Nigel Farage. The man they couldn't cancel. The man they couldn't silence. For a quarter of a century, he stood alone and warned that this day was coming. He was ridiculed by the BBC, vilified by The Guardian, dismissed as a charlatan by the entire Westminster establishment. They called him a clown. They called him a racist. The entire political and media class, from the BBC to the Financial Times, built their careers on defining themselves against him. And in doing so, they defined themselves against the common sense of the British people. Every jeer, every sneer, every pompous dismissal has now come back to haunt them. He was right about the euro. He was right about the erosion of sovereignty. He was right about the breaking point. The man in the pub was right all along. The elites were wrong. And the people on the streets of Rotherham are not a marauding gang. They are the bill for decades of betrayal, finally coming due. They are the living proof that Farage was right all along. Reform UK is no longer just a political party. It is becoming a national liberation movement, a digital samizdat passing truth from screen to screen. And the heroes of this story are not the cowards in Parliament. They are the ordinary men and women of Britain, standing up in their forgotten towns and roaring, with one voice, enough is enough. Now, the machine will grind into action. The establishment, terrified by the sight of real public anger, will begin its counterattack. They will use the police, the courts, and their allies in the broadcast media to crush this nascent rebellion. They will selectively prosecute protesters while the architects of the crisis face no consequences. They will flood the airwaves with pundits and psychologists to diagnose your anxiety, to explain away your legitimate anger as some kind of social sickness. They will use the new powers of the state, laws written under the guise of safety, to monitor your online activity. They will contact employers of those who dissent. They will label patriotism as a pre-crime indicator. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the documented strategy of captured institutions. They will demand your silence. They will demand your obedience. But after Rotherham, something is different. Something has broken. The carefully constructed illusion of a government of the people, by the people, for the people has been exposed as a grotesque fraud. The chasm between the rulers and the ruled is now too wide to be bridged with empty promises. So you have a choice to make. A simple choice, but one that will define the future of this island for a century.